welcome to the Public Safety Committee. I'm Mitchell Englander. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Mitchell Farrell and Councilmember Monica Rodriguez. Thank you very much. We're going to jump right into it since we're running a little late this morning. For those of you who made the commute from the Valley, thank you for that. So I would ask colleagues that we go ahead. Well, we've got a number of cards first. We'll go through those first before we go through the consent items. Okay, item 9. Mr. Previn, come on up. You got 2 minutes on every item, or 2 minutes for all items, I should say. Let me correct that. And stick to the items and only the ones that are on the agenda for those 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Eric Previn. I live in CD2, Studio City, and for the record, I did not sign up on all the items. I signed up on about 4 or 5 of the 11 items. I just want to speak about item number 6. I know that you're trying to be ahead of it with regard to First Amendment protests and events, rallies, and such by outlawing certain items. And I'm always concerned when a small group comes up with a list. I know you're trying diligently, but I would just simply say that this program, to me, feels like it's a step toward implementing a stop and frisk policy for public gatherings, which would have a chilling effect. Police already have the authority to arrest violent protesters, and I don't think they need help from this committee. That said, we do want safe places to gather, and I think people do speak out on both sides of issues. And an example in this very committee of where if you speak out about something or if you are a critic, you've just made a new rule in this committee, which I think people notice. There's a little sign above the documentation table that says something quasi-threatening about if you take the materials and they will no longer be provided at this meeting, that you have to go get online somewhere. Just to be clear, it was my understanding that you could take materials after a couple meetings ago when I was here, and I took them for that reason.
Stick to the agenda items, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to explain that.
But that's not the agenda item, so you're going to forfeit your time, and we'll go ahead and start your 1 minute for general public comment.
Well, I would rather finish my items, which is item.
1 minute for general public comment. Thank you.
Well, I find that inappropriate, but fine. I was concerned about the donations. We get a lot of donations, and today we're getting one that's hard to argue with because everybody likes community policing, myself included. And it's for $250,000, and it's to go to the 77th, Harvard Square project, which I think at the county they just appointed Josh Green. The only thing, and I know that the money comes from the Ballmer Foundation, which they did disclose in this case, but I think they should also disclose that the Weingart Foundation, there was another donor who also contributed to that project. I just think it's helpful to know. And also Wilshire, you have a nice program where you're getting $21,000 from something called the Wilshire Fund, which is great. It's going to go to the cadet program, but where does that money actually come from? It's a little confusing because everything gets veiled in the layers of what almost look like repetitive police commission documentation. So I would ask that you be more forthright. And as you recall, last time I asked for a public record request for all the donations to LAPD for the last year, and I appreciate if you take that seriously.
All right, thank you very much. And the next speakers we have are for a couple on items 5. We have Pete White on item 5 and 6. 5, 6, and 8. Okay, so Melanie Choa?
Are we doing this?
I'm sorry? Oh, is it?
I'm Pete White.
Yeah, not yet. I'm just going through. Sorry. I'll take you next. No worries. Yes. You have multiple speaker cards, so you have items 5, 6, and 8, so you have 2 minutes for all those 3 items.
Melanie Ochoa with the ACLU. Regarding LAFD's drone program, while we appreciate that its stated goal is not surveillance, you cannot protect against surveillance solely through a mission statement. The policy still fails to include actual limits on the creation and use of footage necessary to prohibit surveillance uses. For instance, it does not prohibit recording in densely populated areas or at protests. The more it allows drone use in ways that will record the public, the more potential to be used as a surveillance tool. LAFD has said its need is for real-time information, yet the policy does not prohibit or limit recording, and the prohibition on indiscriminate sharing is insufficient. Once it is out of their hands, they have no control over its use, regardless of their own policies. As stated more fully in our prior letters, ACLU urges the Council not to sanction LAFD's drone, at least until these issues are resolved. The proposed trespassing ordinance would make new crimes out of conduct that is too trivial to constitute a violation of any existing public safety laws. This goes directly against Angelino's votes to decriminalize conduct that does not pose an actual threat, keep people out of prison, and move away from reliance on the criminal justice system. In less than 24 hours, over 1,600 Angelinos have sent letters opposing this new law. This is not good for our city. It also creates unnecessary opportunities for police to stop people who are peacefully using public spaces and risk that those encounters will escalate and result in innocent people being injured or killed. At the police commission meetings, individuals who have spoken only a few seconds over their allotted time or on a subject deemed off-topic have been arrested. No charges were filed because they violated no law. This is a thinly veiled attempt to change that. We also oppose proposed limits on items allowed at protests or on city property. An individual does not have fewer rights when engaged in constitutionally protected activities than when going about their daily business. If a mini baseball bat is dangerous, then it is equally dangerous at a Dodgers game as on city property or at a public protest. We question the legality of any ordinance that attempts to strip rights solely from those engaged in protected activities.
Okay, thank you very much. And before you go into general public comment, do we have any other cards for general public comment? I'll call them all up now.
No other cards.
Okay, then general public comment is closed. And all the other cards have already been submitted for all the items. And the only other person we have is, excuse me, you're disrupting the meeting, sir. You're going to be asked to leave. There's still, okay, can you, Mr. Spindler, you've disrupted this meeting? Can you please escort him out? He's disrupting this meeting. Thank you. Can you please escort him out? Thank you. Thank you very much, Sergeant. Can you please escort him out? Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Excuse me, you're disrupting this meeting. Sergeants, please escort him out. A little quicker. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please take him out of the room. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you for disrupting this meeting once again. Okay, so we'll go ahead and Pete White, you have cards on 5 and 6. So you have a minute on each item, sir.
Thank you, Pete White with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. So in such an odd and absurd way, this proposed ordinance is a real threat to public safety. Further attempts to strip Angelinos of their First Amendment right to lobby their elected and appointed officials. Attempts to design and define what type of speech is acceptable and allowing individual bodies to design rules that criminalizes those things they don't feel like dealing with. Further targets houseless people or those deemed inappropriate by appearance or behavior. I can see legal accommodations and ADA complaints in your near future if this were to pass, and it's fraught with racist and gendered overtones, hair picks, and knitting needles. I expect this type of behavior on Trump's Twitter feed at 2 in the morning or at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in an overtly racist administration, but not here in a purportedly progressive LA. This is not worth the time that we pay you to do the work of this great city. And that was in regards to rules of decorum. This is in regards to protests and items that can be brought. I urge you to please back away from further intrusion on protected speech and protests covered by the First Amendment. The idea that lawful items become unlawful if engaged in lawful conduct is extremely bizarre and opens Pandora's box of racial profiling, use of force, and lethal force, pointed towards those attempting to lobby their government, primarily, as history shows, black people and people of color. We urge you to walk away from these further attempts to engage or to stop and shut down protected speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Appreciate that. And then our last card on item 5 is Catherine Boyle. Morning, ma'am.
My name is Catherine Boyce. I'm a resident and business owner in downtown Los Angeles. I'm here to voice my opposition to item number 5, this ordinance. It will squelch public comment to the detriment of the public. It will increase the likelihood of dangerous and potentially deadly confrontations between the police and the public. To me, this is an attempt to limit free speech and limit speech that the council thinks is difficult and to penalize the public for exercising their rights. Making something as trivial as having a dog off leash in a public park punishable by 6 months in jail is not proper use of police and city resources. What happened here today in the first comment is exactly what I'm talking about, that you deemed his logic in support of his comment off topic. He could be arrested if this ordinance passes, and to me, that's wrong. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much. All right, colleagues, a number of items for consent. That concludes all the cards that have been submitted for all the items. So item 1, including making amendments to instruct the CLA with the assistance of the CAO and LAPD to report back in 30 days. So I'd like to pass that on consent with that instruction. That'll be the order without objection. Thank you very much. Number 2, we'll go ahead and approve 4 and to adopt the CAO report. Number 9, 10, and 11. None of those items specials. We'll go ahead and approve those items. Yes.
I just want to make a comment on item 4 that the CAO report was submitted after the posting of the agenda.
Yes.
And that those recommendations are similar to the mayor's recommendations.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. Colleagues, on number 5, we had public comment on that, so I'd like to open and close public comment. But then we'll go ahead and we have a request from the city attorney to continue that item, so we'll continue it to the next meeting. But satisfied public comment unless something significantly changes on the next agenda for that. Okay? On item 3, we'll go ahead and hear then item 3, 6, 7, and 8. First, let's go ahead and hear item 3. This was a motion that I authored with, co-authored by, or seconded by Councilmember Buscaino, instructing ITA to actually work with LAPD and LAFD to conduct a comprehensive tech assessment of the needs. So, Mr. Ross, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Good morning, council members. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Certainly, technology plays an invaluable role at the City of Los Angeles, whether it's making our operations more efficient or if it's providing residents and businesses with new services, new digital services. It's absolutely been a game changer. Technology is especially important for public safety. From 911 dispatch to radio communications to cops in stations to firefighters in quarters, LA Public Safety is most effective, as you very well know, when our professionals in the field have the right types of technology tools to support them in the work they do. This requires strong strategic technology planning and investments to meet the needs of both today while preparing for the needs of tomorrow. In response to the motion, in response to the motion, I've met with my colleagues in Police Department and in Fire. I would like to introduce Scott Porter, CIO for LA Fire Department, and Brian Ganley, recently added CIO for LAPD, to discuss a little bit about the current technology strategy approach.
Great. Good morning, council members. Scott Porter, LA Fire CIO. I just wanted to spend a minute or less talking about our current IT strategy and our strategic planning process. Essentially, the fire chief develops his strategic plan on a 3-year basis. This year, the plan is up for renewal. Our IT strategy approach, the first strategy we developed last year, it's just coming upon a year, is essentially to align our technology investments with the fire chief's strategy, which is aligned with the mayor's strategy. So our current plan has 10 initiatives that are prioritized, and within each of those initiatives, we basically line up to the fire chief's strategic plan to make sure that we're using technology in a way that enhances both the fire department's goals and objectives, but also clearly supports the readiness and the availability of him meeting his strategic goals. The fire chief right now is in the process of revamping his strategic plan for the next 3 years, and we'll be making adjustments to our IT strategy to line up with that as soon as that comes out early next year. So in terms of answering this particular motion, we plan to work with ITA to inform them of our IT strategy, the planning process that went into that, our strategic goals, and then also the critical role that ITA plays in our ability to actually execute against those goals.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly, Brian, so if you don't mind spending a minute describing LAPD and the approach to technology strategy.
And Brian, welcome to the City of Los Angeles. So,
Thank you.
when did you start?
2 weeks ago.
Fantastic. All right. So you're already knee-deep and have everything down exactly what we need in terms of getting your arms around everything and all things technology with the Los Angeles Police Department.
On the way.
All right. That's excellent.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you. It's great to be here. Very similar to what Mr. Porter said. During the recruitment process and in the couple of weeks that I've been here so far, been very pleased to see a very detailed strategic planning process within the department. So starting with the department's 2020 plan, which is based on the mayor's priorities, the Information Technology Bureau, of which I head as CIO, does a strategic plan based on the department's 2020 goals. There is virtually no goal throughout the department that does not involve technology in some way or another, obviously. Then based on that strategic plan, a more detailed strategic IT initiatives, top 10, similar to what Mr. Porter mentioned for the fire department. And then based on that, through the budget process, that's how we prioritize our budget requests. So kind of top initiatives, RMS, the records management system, is the core of information processing within the police department. So that's very high on our list. Connected officer, several other technologies for the officers in the field as well as the back end. And we're working hard on those and preparing with the budget process that I've come in a little bit late on, but I'm getting up to speed as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you very much. So the need, one of the reasons we put this motion in is because it's been my experience, colleagues, that oftentimes this isn't done in a very open and transparent manner. It's driven by the departments internally, which is fine, but oftentimes we don't have the conversation and the dialogue and the input from this committee and from the full city council. And then many times, in fact, we're asked at the tail end of a process or a conversation that there's a certain technology that's absolutely needed, it's critically important, it's urgent, it's timely, and we've got to find the funding to do it. And we weren't part of the process either in negotiating and in having a question and an answer and a conversation about how we got to that place and what we're doing. And then oftentimes at the end of that conversation, there are numerous changes and either change orders and technology. There's usually, it gets very either political or lobby heavy from different technology companies. It's vendor driven. And so we're hoping to sort of add some sunlight to the process and prioritize what we're doing. And the first thing that we need to do is really bring ITA into the House a lot closer, because Ted Shop is the one that actually not only has the expertise, I believe, which is why we have an IT department and general manager, but also is the one responsible for maintaining after we acquire equipment. And so it's important for them to be part of that conversation, I think, from the beginning. With that, while we have these strategic plans in place, many times a government operates so slowly that by the time we start going out to the marketplace, the technology is completely changed dramatically, much quicker than internally our process does. So we have our eye on the target for a particular type of technology infrastructure, be that some type of cameras, database systems, computers, radio communication systems, backbone, whatever we need to do, record systems management, which is a whole other conversation. And by the time we get there and start having the conversation in procurement, whether it's sole source, RFP, RFQ, or RFIs, by the time we get to that process, the technology is already 3 or 4 years advanced from what we're acquiring. So I want to try to change that timeline a little bit. The first thing I think we need desperately is a critical and immediate list of what we need. So I'd prioritize these rather than looking at a 3-year plan. I would start it off as a critical. So what do we need today? And I don't mean just a full replacement of a particular, whether it be the radios, which is a major conversation we're having now, so I would start with that. But it's not, we need all new radio systems in every single vehicle and all handhelds. It's what do we need today to keep operating tomorrow, not for the rest of the year, but what do we need today? What's the critical? What's in front of us? Then what's the short term? And the short term, I'd say, is the next 18 months for implementation and acquisition. What's that short term? And I keep bringing up what I keep hearing in the field is our officers from the PD side, the systems in the stations are so slow that on average they can spend up to an hour just logging in on a particular shift because the computers are so antiquated. And I know that IT's gone out and looked at some of them, and it's a joke, actually. It's beyond cutting-edge 1984 technology. We've got systems that the operating system alone, which requires by the manufacturer 6 gigabytes of RAM, for example, just to turn on, not to mention the dozens of encrypted, highly encrypted databases that they have to access, including video feeds now because of on-body camera as well as in-car video for review. Those computers only have 2 gigabytes of RAM. So if you can imagine, officers can't even do their job. So we got to look at what's critical. Right now, today, what do we need to do just to keep operational, both on the PD and the fire side? What's the short term, and then the 3 years, the long term? I'm not even talking about 5 or 10 years because technology changes too quick. On the critical, what I'd like to do is break this into phases and have ITA be the lead agency in this and working with, and that's what the motion calls for, PD and fire, to do a quick analysis on the critical and immediate infrastructure and what do we need to acquire and fix and repair, and report back on that first. And the question is, how long do we think that might take?
It's within 45 days, an acceptable time frame?
Great. Okay. That'd be terrific. And I would start with radios, with both PD and fire. And I know fire has immediate critical need, so that'd be great. Okay. Colleagues, do you have anything else to add on this? We're good? Okay, excellent. Then that'll be the order. We'll go ahead and send this to the full City Council with approval and those recommendations. So it'll be 45 days back here, but I still want this going back to the council and then back here in 45 days.
Yes.
So we'll move it out of committee. Okay, excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6.
Item 6 is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending the municipal code to regulate the possession of certain items at public protests, demonstrations, rallies, picket lines, and public assemblies.
Good morning.
Good morning. Assistant City Attorney Julie Raffish.
Good morning, Deputy Chief Horace Frank.
So first of all, I appreciate it. I know you've done a really comprehensive analysis and look at best practices and what makes sense. If you can just sort of walk us through it and where we're at, and then I'll open up for questions. I know I have a couple as well.
Sure. Pursuant to the Council's request on October 13th, the City Attorney's Office started to examine amending Section 5507 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to add additional items to the items that were already prohibited for possession by persons engaged in certain types of activities, such as demonstrations, rallies, picket lines, and public assemblages. As you just mentioned, Councilmember, as part of our review, we looked at what other municipalities had done, both within the state of California as well as nationally. As I think we're all aware, unfortunately, the last several months have seen a significant increase in the number of violent encounters and outbursts at what would otherwise be a regular public assembly. And as a result of that, the police department, I believe, felt it imperative to take a much closer look at the types of items that were being utilized to inflict injury or injury to public health and safety, not only of attendees and participants, but law enforcement as well. And as a result of that, they provided evidence of specific items which had in fact been utilized at a number of violent events over the last several months. And we in turn did research to determine whether or not those items would be proper for inclusion here. I did want to bring to the committee's attention the fact that LAMC Section 5507 has existed in our code since 1978. And that section was upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal against First Amendment challenges and vagueness challenges in 2003. This draft ordinance that's been presented to you simply adds to that ordinance additional items for which evidence exists that the items are being used by individuals to commit the type of violence that that the ordinance is designed and sought to minimize and curtail.
So these are items such as baseball bats, tear gas, mace, projectile launchers, firearms, knives, swords, sabers, axes, hatchets, razor blades, nunchucks, those kinds of things?
Yes. So I think it might be helpful for the committee to understand that some of the items are maybe considered to be more traditionally associated with expressive activities, such as signage. Other items are allowed the same constitutional protection because they're used as vehicles for that expressive activity, like poles and posts that are used to hold up signs or hold up puppets during expressive events. And other items have little, if any, expressive value, but unfortunately have been improvised and used as weapons.
So this is really in an effort to not curtail free speech or demonstration, but to protect the public and the officers themselves.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think our ordinance does, not to pat myself on the back, I think our ordinance does an exemplary job of trying to continue to permit the use of items where they can be used to facilitate additional expression. There is not a flat ban on wood. There is not a flat ban on plastic piping because we understand that those would be necessary, perhaps, to hoist a sign above a crowd in order to get a message delivered to an intended audience.
Well, actually, I mean, you've gone on to say that not generally rectangular in shape, such objects for wood, for example, not exceeding 3/4 inch in thickness, dimension, both ends are lumber, wood, or wood lathe should be blunt. So you've spelled it out in both plastic, metal, and wood that they can use it to hold up signs if it meets a certain criteria.
With the exception of metal.
With the exception of the metal.
Metal is prohibited, but plastic and wood are permitted.
Well, that's what most people use anyway, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I don't think you need to pat yourself on the back. I think we could all do that for you. You've done a phenomenal job, quite frankly, in coming up with what seems to be, just put it out there, common sense. For those that argue that people should have the right to bring all of these items to public events, particularly for protests, chains and nunchucks and martial art weaponry and box cutters. I just don't understand their argument. Biohazard materials and noxious matter. So, colleagues, I want to open it up to you for any comments or questions. Mr. Rue?
I'm good.
Mr.
Questions.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this report, and thank you for your work on it, Ms. Rafish. A couple of questions. Can you define 1/8 inch in wall thickness in terms of plastic or metal hollow piping?
So it would be plastic, and those are dimensions that were provided to us by the police department, but I would say that the dimensions that have been presented are consistent with what you would normally see at a hardware store in terms of PVC pipe, like a regular size, an average size PVC pipe, as opposed to something that is more thick in its thickness or in its overall diameter.
Okay. And would a 1x2 piece of wood where someone's constructing a sign, the way I read this, it seems to me that wouldn't even be allowed. If someone constructed a big sign and had a 1x2 piece of wood.
Well, the way the ordinance currently read, before any amendments were made to it, the measurements were The object needed to be 1/4 inch or less in thickness and 2 inches or less in width, or if not rectangular in shape, not exceeding 3/4 inch in its thickest dimension. So we're talking about a piece of wood that presumably could be used to hoist or project a sign or a puppet, but that, if used as a weapon, would break more easily.
And so a lot of these, it's hard to believe they're even allowed. Axes, hatchets, ice picks, razor blades,
It's amazing.
BB guns. Now, are some of these things, they're not like BB guns. You can't just carry a BB gun around in public anyway, can you?
I would probably defer to the police department for some existing laws concerning prohibitions on possession of items.
Chief?
Well, nunchucks are illegal.
They're illegal anyway. So some of this is duplicative, but just to overstate the obvious, just in case people get the idea. Right. To
Correct.
do something stupid. Chains, can people just carry chains around?
Well, a lot of it depends on the size of the chain. Just walking around with a regular chain is not going to be illegal. But certainly, in a situation like this, in which we've seen, as Ms. Raffers has already indicated, we've seen these items being used not just once, but repeatedly over the past, I'd say about 8 or 9 incidents that we've seen over the last, it's going back to about March of this year. They've been repeatedly used as weapons against not just police officers, but of also other innocent folks who are exercising their First Amendment rights.
And in terms of implementation, once we amend the ordinance, how would this be implemented? And how, you're obviously not going to inspect thousands or tens of thousands of protesters, but people need to be aware of the added list of outlawed things that you can bring.
Sure.
Otherwise, they could suffer a misdemeanor arrest.
Well, the ordinance itself provides for a warning. And so the individual is going to be given an opportunity to divest themselves of whatever the offending property is.
Before being charged.
Of course, yeah, before actually any enforcement action is taken against them. However, as with any other new ordinance or law, the department will develop training and or protocols, and we will be consulted in that process and determine how best to instruct officers and the public.
Yes. There's just, I just want to just insert some sensitivity in this. I just want to make sure that the city isn't speaking out of two sides of its mouth, because, we're so concerned justifiably about deportation for vending in parks and on the streets. I would want to make sure that someone who comes to a DACA or an immigrant rights protest doesn't get innocently or unwittingly charged with a misdemeanor, and then you have the same result. So that's kind of what was striking to me about this sudden effort, is that we seem to sometimes be speaking out of both sides of our mouths as policymakers with this concern with ICE and deportation and immigrants, et cetera. I just want to make sure that we don't unwittingly go down a road that really causes problems that we are trying to prevent on the other side of things sometimes. And let me just say also that and I went to the Women's March in January, and all sorts of outlawed things were being carried, not chains and guns and all the weaponry. That I didn't see any of that, but I can't imagine a successful Women's March with all of these things on the list at this point. So I think that this is going to have real implications in terms of what people can carry to exercise their First Amendment rights, notwithstanding the crazy list of weaponry, which should be absolutely banned. So those are some of my thoughts about that. And you mentioned other cities have adopted similar ordinances, including Berkeley. What are some of the differences, or are there great similarities in terms of the lists and the ordinance 5507 with other cities?
In certain respects, there are similarities, and in certain important respects, there are distinctions. They were distinctions that we felt were necessary in order to strengthen the overall constitutionality of our ordinance as compared with other cities' ordinances. We have sought to define the items with as much specificity as we can, whereas other cities did not. We have sought to allow the possession of posts and poles made out of different materials, whereas other cities have not. They have relegated the use of signs to anything a participant can hold in their hands, and that's it. We have sought to require a warning before any enforcement is taken, and we have stayed away from any language that in any way could be understood to be intended to be addressed to a particular type of speech, a particular type of speaker, or a particular type of event. That's only going to strengthen this ordinance as opposed to other cities' ordinances that appear to be quite reactive to particular speakers and messages.
Okay. And lastly, this motion was introduced earlier this month, and the language is brand new. It's the first time that a lot of us are seeing it. Why the rush? Why not more deliberation, or just at least more? No, I
you
read
saw
that.
this?
Thank
Okay.
you. I read it. I'm very aware of it. But
I'm not sure there's a rush. I would only say that, unfortunately, these types of violent encounters and events tend to be unpredictable in terms of when they occur. They also tend to be unpermitted. So the requirement that someone get a permit before they engage in some sort of expressive activity allows the city a certain number of hours or days to prepare. And in this instance, most of these violent encounters are occurring at events that are completely unpermitted. So I think there's just an acknowledgement that they could happen at any time, and an effort to try to put something in place to address it, whether it occurs tomorrow or it occurs 3 months from now.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was happy to second your motion here. And when I was reviewing it before I signed it, I was baffled to know that some of these items already are not prohibited during these First Amendment marches and events. And I told myself, you know, who in the hell needs a glass bottle, a hammer, or crowbar to express his or her First Amendment rights? I think it doesn't go far enough. If you look at number 8, item number 8, nothing in this subsection is intended to prohibit the wearing of scarves, bandanas, veils.
That's not currently in the ordinance that has been transmitted to this committee, number 8.
Because if you look at what's taken place in these violent protests, these knuckleheads use scarves, bandanas to conceal themselves, and it counters those who are actually following the rules.
Understood.
So
My response to you, Councilmember, would be that the items on the list are items that have been improvised or, by their very nature, exist as weapons. And in order to present an ordinance that was as narrowly tailored as possible to the real concern, which is the preservation of public safety and public health,
sure.
Certain items were not included for that reason.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this move forward. So I know supportive of expanding the list of these prohibitive items. I know it's a big step in protecting our communities. But as we know, if a person has the intent to harm, he or she will do anything to find a way to do so. So, you know, especially in light of our Dodgers who are in the World Series, maybe Chief Frank can address this. Let's project the Dodgers winning the World Series, and there's a lot of fans out there who will get excited, and maybe we'll take to the streets, as we've seen in other Lakers celebrations the night they win. How do we prepare ourselves would you consider a championship rally a First Amendment rally in the streets of downtown Los Angeles, where we see the excitement turn into violence, turn into looting? This would be used as a tool, I'm assuming?
I would certainly say so, Councilman. Again, the whole purpose here is to allow people to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights. And having this as a tool would be significant for us as an organization to ensuring that not just for the safety of police officers, but also for those individuals who do indeed want to celebrate lawfully and in a joyous manner. So I would see this as a significant tool towards that end. Over the past incidents that we've seen over the last 8 or so months, we've had, in terms of the type of weapons that are being used, we've seen over 325 arrests nationwide. There have been about 85 individuals who have been injured, and injuries going all the way from concussions to broken bones. And obviously we know of the unfortunate event in Charlottesville, but the type of weapons, the type of items that individuals are using are things that normally no one would even think about. And that's why we think it's so necessary to do this. So this would be certainly essential in a situation that you've just brought up. Yes, it would be.
Well, and then lastly, to Mr. O'Farrell's concern, it's a valid concern about the deportation, but I mean, I too know a number of DACA recipients, including one of my deputies, but I don't see him at a DACA protest carrying with him biological toxic waste fluid.
Yeah, nor do I.
Or
Why don't he work for you, Joe?
I just so again, it's a concern, but I mean, these are peaceful protesters, but we have to address those knuckleheads who want to spoil it for those who are really trying to send a message. So appreciate the work, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on this.
No, you're it's interesting. It dawned on me that all these items are prohibited at all public venues that are privately held. So Staples Center, Dodger Stadium. I mean, none of these items are allowed in any of those public, and those are public venues that are privately held. And the only one that I know that carries all of these items all the time are the LA Times reporters. But outside of that, I'm kidding, Emily. All right. So, do you have anything?
Chair, quick question.
Yes, please.
Just quick question on the actual practicality of it. Obviously, it's axes, hatchets, ice picks, razor blades. I mean, it's unacceptable. But so what happens in reality if at some sort of event or some sort of rally, someone does have a super soaker or some sort of sign that's greater than 1/4 thickness? Is it an immediate arrest? Do you take it away? Does the police officer have a discretion to just...
Can you walk us through spirit of the law versus letter of the law?
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for that, Councilman. So one of the things we're going to do with this is we're going to develop a training working with the city attorney's office for all our officers. Clearly, this ordinance requires that each individual, obviously absent exigent circumstance, would have to be given a warning. So they'd be given an opportunity to dispense of the item or leave the area with the item. But they will certainly be given an opportunity. It would not be any automatic, just grab the person, arrest them just like that.
Or you wouldn't take it away from them?
Well, we would give them the opportunity, would give them a warning to either give us the item, dispense of the item, or they can leave with the item.
Okay. And then again, if they don't, can you walk us through the spirit of the law versus letter of the law?
So if they refuse to leave the area with the item, or they refuse to give up the item, then they would be arrested. This particular section of the ordinance is a misdemeanor, so we would handle this as we would any other misdemeanor. And there's a whole protocol that the department goes through when it comes to deal with misdemeanor crimes. Yeah. So they'll be treated exactly the same way.
Thank you. I'm satisfied.
And Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable with that as well, because there's a big difference between someone just trying to make a living, who may be documented or not, and someone who is coming to a protest, who brings an implement that may not be permitted under this modified ordinance, and is given a chance to just like put it away or give it up and still engage in a free speech.
Absolutely.
Right. There's a big difference there. So that's the comfort level I was looking for.
And under the misdemeanor clause, though, under this, even with a warning, is it a could or a should or shall be arrested?
Again, it depends on the situation at hand, but as we would any other misdemeanor. Really,
so they could be
on the situation at
not
hand.
shall be.
No.
So the difference being that perhaps somebody has a story where they're telling an officer as a hypothetical, oh yes, well, I won't give this up, but I'm leaving in 2 minutes. I'm just waiting for my friend. And it's something that exceeded the specifications of the wood or something like that, and says, well, I don't want to throw it away or break it or destroy it or give it to you, but I am leaving in 2 minutes. Can you just wait a minute? The officer has the discretion to say, yeah, no problem, we'll go ahead and wait with you, or I'm waiting for a parent or whatever. They don't have to make the arrest at that point. There's some flexibility under the spirit of the law, and that's sort of built into this?
Yes, sir. That is correct. And again, that's some of the training things that we're going to go through with developing, implementing some training guidelines for our officers, working with the city attorney's office.
Right. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, board members, if I can, with your permission, I have provided some information to the clerks with regards that we'd like to have included in the council file relative to the types of protests, the types of items, the arrest injuries that we've been seeing happening over the past several months. I've given that.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll go ahead and move this item with approval? Okay, it's approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
This is Oh, yeah, okay. I didn't know he'd pass it out yet.
No, it's
Okay, I
not.
apologize. That's what I was getting. All right. Go ahead and go to the next item here. Item 7, please. LAPD report back on the street racing statistics through ComStat. Morning.
Yeah. Good morning, sir.
Morning. Lieutenant Dave Ferry, Traffic Coordination Section, Emergency Operations Division. Regarding item number 7, street racing, it's definitely a historical issue in the city of LA with a subculture of people who modify their vehicles for speed, and it's driven by social media. If we do an internet search on 213-1320 or 818-1320, this is the area code of the Los Angeles area, and 1320 being 1,320 feet, which is the amount of feet in a quarter mile, which is the distance that standard racing distance. We'll see just how organized these racers and the spectators are. They chronicle these races. They put on videos. They use the social media to direct their next meetings as to where they're going to go. A lot of times they'll use code words for where they're going to go. Looking historically, 2015 to present, according to Switters, LA has had 19 street racing collisions, resulting in 24 injuries and 8 deaths. These numbers are very conservative because those are the collisions that we know are street racing. Many more are suspected street racing collisions, which we may or may not be able to prove.
Let me just jump in and ask you a couple questions real quick. I don't know if you've got anything to submit in writing to the committee in terms of report, because it was in March of 2015 and approved by the council in October of 2015 to start tracking these numbers for ComStat purposes, and so we can report back and start looking at a couple of things. One, identifying where and how often they're occurring, and so we can start looking at strategies to implement or pilot programs to deter them. And so I don't know if you have from March of 15 or actually October of 15 when it was approved by council to submit a report based on the new tracking systems for street racing besides collisions and great bodily harm, injury, or death. Do we actually have from various divisions of where we're at?
We don't have a written report, sir.
Okay. Have we been tracking the street racing now in ComStat?
We don't have a specific section for ComStat, for street racing and ComStat.
This is frustrating because this was approved by the City Council, instructing the LAPD to do that. So is there a reason why it hasn't been done?
I don't know, sir. I'll have to
So
look
people are
into it.
dying and getting injured, and we have more vehicle deaths than any other type of avoidable death in the city of Los Angeles, if I can use that phrase. And more people and young people are getting injured and killed because of street racing, and we have hot spots and we have new technologies and ways to prevent it. I did a pilot program in my district recently with rumble strips, And we've had 0 street racing now at that location, and it has been proven successful. And I appreciate the partnership with you guys. I know you're not the ones that that actually come up with what's tracked in ComStat. That comes from the chief, but it's been instructed and signed by the mayor and approved by the council to track these numbers in ComStat, and it's not being done. And here we are 2 years later. So I would suggest that we hold this in committee, and we can have the chief of police report back directly or send somebody from his command staff, tell us why it's not being tracked in ComStat. And I'd love to hear the reasoning why it hasn't been done. So we'll go ahead and hold this in committee and have one of the command staff come to report, or the chief of police can come directly and let us know why they feel that it has been ignored by the council signed by the mayor to track this in ComStat. Anything else?
Well, I too am shocked that we're not, are you sure we're not maybe designating or categorizing these accidents in a different way via ComStat?
Well, may I address it? Mr. Chairman, Captain Lopez out of Central Traffic Division. We do have a task force set up to track, and we are tracking the street racing activity that's occurring in both Operation Central Bureau and Operation South Bureau. And we have been in place since 2015.
Right.
And we do author a report, so we can author a report for Central Bureau and South
But the question was citywide as part of ComStat statistics, which we track and trace everything, except this wasn't being done and wasn't being tracked through ComStat. So we learned that in 2015. And in a way to get in front of this and look at hotspots and really look at it from a different perspective, we asked that it be added to ComStat and was told it was going to be done.
Also, aren't street racing incidences more frequent in the valley?
They are.
In the North Valley?
And San Pedro. And, yeah, it's the valley.
So, I mean, I have the perception, I could be totally wrong, but I know some of it happens in Central Bureau as well.
Sure.
But it would seem that you'd be paying close attention to the North Valley, not just Central and South. But what I was going to say also is where and how often is key, because if we get a list of the streets that are more frequently used, we should put cameras on them.
And with all due respect, street racing has evolved since 2015.
Right.
And we do have a video, a 1-minute video, which will show you what the evolution of street racing and what our officers are combated with, and the ever-growing popularity in social media and how they are addressing it. It's bigger than everybody thinks. Everybody thinks street racing is 2 cars on Sepulveda Boulevard going a quarter mile.
I had 4 people under the age of 24 just a few weeks ago die in my district from street racing. And it's close to home.
Yes.
It's not just my district. My daughter knew them. This is an issue we've been battling for a long time, which is why specifically the City Council asked LAPD to add this to ComStat. And I'm shocked that LAPD has failed to follow through on not a request, an instruction approved by the City Council and the mayor to add this to ComStat, and it hasn't been done, to give you guys more tools that you need. It's not on you, the 3 of you that are sitting here. I think you guys are doing a great job. In fact, we're doing everything we can, and I will be supporting and on the record today our street surveys, which obviously are very unpopular in terms of increasing speed for enforcement, because there's so many streets we can't enforce right now. And so I'm behind everything you guys are doing. But we need the tools to be able to work with the department and look at patterns and frequency, so we can come up with new technologies, programs, and funding to help support and combat what's happening here. But let's go ahead and roll the 1-minute video since you brought it here now. And what's the location?
Sergeant Garcia's Central Traffic Division. It's just various locations throughout the city itself, Valley, West, South, and Central. But it provides you a quick snapshot of the 7 different categories that we've identified involved with street racing.
Right.
That first video was Hollenbeck. That video there was 77th. This is a county area just outside of 77th.
Oh, they just stand in circles, yeah. It's,
That I believe is up in the valley.
Knuckleheads on parade.
And all this activity that you see here going on, it's citywide.
Right.
And it's not just isolated to one bureau, it's everywhere.
well, the problem, too, is nowadays you don't have to be either one of the racers or even in the audience or one of the spectators to be injured. You could just be somebody that just happens to be walking their children across the street, driving to or from work or home on your bicycle. I mean, we're seeing more and more of these, and a lot of victims that weren't even part of being there, and which is why we ask that this be taken seriously as a crime and tracked within LAPD and categorized as such. So we can. So what that does is the whole idea, as we all know in CompStat, is you can't fix what you can't measure. So if we can measure it and deploy the correct resources to combat this and look at different strategies, that's where it takes it to a different level. That's the whole beauty and benefit of CompStat, is having that, not just the data, but the dialogue to go with it. It's knowing where things are occurring and the frequency and how often and what's happening. We know this is a growing problem, but it's not being tracked as such. So we're going to go ahead and keep this in committee. We'll go ahead and ask the command staff to come back, and we'll schedule it for the next meeting, but we want to hear why they haven't followed through with the request. So,
May I note something, Mr. Chairman? Although it hasn't been a hard topic in CompStat, I have been posed a question by the command staff when I report to CompStat on my street racing task.
Well, I understand that, but that's different than adding it as a layer of data, and it hasn't been done. And so we'll go ahead and bring the command staff back, and I can't wait for them to come back and can't wait to hear what answer they have. So sure, I speak for all of us when we talk about how serious this is. So thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then the next item we'll take is item 8. And I believe that's our final item.
Item 8 is a Board of Fire Commissioners report relative to the Los Angeles Fire Department Unmanned Aerial Systems Policy for Deployment and Use.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's just an Morning.
Morning, Councilman. How are you?
Good. Welcome back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it looks like we're here with the policy for fire department for this is the final policy for drone usage. And I know there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of conversation about this. I think in terms of what you guys have come up with a policy and what it would be used for and what it wouldn't be used for is probably the best in the nation, quite frankly. And really appreciate the efforts that you've brought. If you want to just do a quick thumbnail overview, I can open it up for any questions.
Absolutely. First of all, none of this would have been possible without collaboration, not only with your office, Councilman, and the support of this committee, and thank you for that, but we have collaborated with our other fire agency partners, law enforcement partners, the UAV community nationally,
right.
As well as the support and collaboration with the City Attorney's Office and our Fire Commission. At our last presentation before you was just a draft of our policy and where we stood at the time. Since then, we've continued to, or reached out a couple more times to the ACLU by our effort, so that we would make it clear that our intention is to be transparent. Our intention in developing this technology, integrating it into our public safety matrix, is simply for information so that it will keep us safe as we protect the public. And the concerns that have arisen, we clearly address those. May not answer
No
every
question.
but we clearly address those concerns. And moving forward and where we are today, we welcome continued collaboration. What we're seeking now in collaborating with the public is there's roughly about 700,000 UAS operators in the country. The FAA estimates that we'll have 7 million by 2020. As a large public service agency, we're trying to get into the conversation, drive legislature, drive that conversation so that we don't have these emergent, non-compliant, and uncaring people who are just using it as a hobby and impacting how we protect the city. So we welcome the collaboration, we welcome the conversation, because we need to regulate what the public does, because in essence it's going to prevent us from protecting and doing our jobs. So the policy now represents several changes. We added some more specific language when it comes to oversight. And with the recommendation of the City Attorney's Office and collaboration with the Fire Commission, the oversight with the independent assessor and what the independent assessor has access to as far as any footage, when and where we would fly a UAS has been added to that. The records retention policy has been beefed up, or the section on records retention has been beefed up, as well as the general oversight for our project. We've added several layers to that so that it's not just one person, it's not just myself. So we have several layers of oversight before whether we fly or what we do with the information as it
Thank you. I had one question, one minor. First of all, I think you've done a phenomenal job, and this is what you've isolated it to in structure fires, high and low rise angle rescue of hikers, swift water incidents. These are the types of incidents you're already at responding to. It gets better situational awareness in real time. What I would suggest also is looking at a future ability on the rescue of hikers, where you can bring something to them, whether it's water or a radio communication system, where once they've been identified through the ability to actually bring them a radio or a bottle of water or something like that, I think would make a lot of sense, and I would start looking at that opportunity to do something like that in the future. But everything that you've outlined in terms of transparency and the way you're going about this makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate it. So I don't have any other questions, colleagues.
Just quickly, I know with last week or so, the Police Commission recently approved the one-year pilot regarding drone use. Has there been talks of coordinating communication with LAPD and LA Fire if you're at the same incident? Has that been talked about and planned for?
Extensively, sir. Councilman, to your point, this has been a 2-year project for me and for our working group. And early on in the project, we began to collaborate with LAPD, mostly to make sure that because their air assets took priority in the majority of our airspace, that we weren't going to do anything to make them uncomfortable, violate airspace rules, and that we had a solid communication plan when we did launch a UAS. So we've been speaking to them really from the inception, speaking to their air operations as well as their SWAT commanders to make sure that we have a common communication platform. And currently we're testing, the UAS industry doesn't have technology currently for deconfliction of airspace. So if I can give you an example, just a manned aircraft, that aircraft sends out a homing beacon that says, hey, this is where I am, and other aircraft can pick that up. UAS Technologies doesn't quite have that. We don't have the geofencing technology currently in place for that. So what we're working on together are the mobile applications that do that process for us. And we're working with LAPD, Torrance, LA County to come up with a common system so that we can all speak together in the event that we're operating in the same airspace.
Thank you, sir.
Where I'd like to see this go after, maybe in the next year or two, to come back to this committee to give us an update on how things are going, but then look at a phase 2 of perhaps if it does work well in terms of transparency and reporting and how we're deploying these, and we can report back on how this has actually worked well and provide some information on very specific incidents and how it's helped save lives and or property, is looking at the possibility of expanding, if that works well, to looking at brush clearance as well, inspections, because that's a big issue where there's terrain we can't get to, and we've seen certainly recently with all of these fires in that we don't have eyes on some of these hard to reach, isolated areas that are high fire severity zones, that it's very difficult to inspect clearly. We're not talking about inspecting private property or homes. We're talking about looking at brush in certain areas where we already have fire department personnel inspectors going there to do that work now, but there may be an opportunity to look at that. We can figure that out later, but at this point, I'd like to move forward with the presentation and the proposal and move this on to the full City Council. Okay? All right, then that is approved unanimously, and that concludes
Was
the...
that an
yes.
additional recommendation, or are you approving the report as is?
I'm sorry?
Was your, was that report back an additional recommendation?
No, we'll go ahead and move it forward, and then we can explore anything else. We got a long time before we have that conversation, so we'll go ahead and move it forward as presented. Okay, then that concludes the agenda. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.